Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm sports editor Chuck Pollock of the Times-Herald, and my colleague JP Butler. We've got some old business to talk about and some new, and we'll start with the old. That was the Big 30 Charity All-Stars Classic, played last Saturday night in Bradford. An interesting game, won by Pennsylvania 38-20. As so often happens in the Big 30 game, the focus becomes the quarterbacks, and JP, each team had an interesting development with their QBs.
They did, and really you could probably say that because of that, it was maybe the difference in the game on Saturday. On the New York side, we had a situation in which one of the two quarterbacks selected to play the game got hurt during the course of practice and ended up not playing in the game. And I remember asking you in the booth, while we were watching that unfold, I said, has this ever happened before where you end up with one of the two quarterbacks out and then the other kid ends up playing the entire game? And I think you said to your knowledge, that's maybe the first time it's ever happened. So in that situation, you had Tommy Easton from Franklinville, Ellicottville, was hurt. They were going to try to give him a chance during that last week of practice to maybe be healthy enough to give it a go on Saturday. They didn't feel he was ready for that. So they ended up going with Ben Burke from Southwestern for the entire game, which didn't necessarily, hurt New York, I don't think, but just the idea that you had one kid having to kind of go in there and lead both offenses. Maybe fatigue plays a factor at a certain point, and you don't have the two different dynamics with those guys. On the other side, Pennsylvania has the two guys, and they end up being two pretty good guys. One we knew about, all season long in the fall was Shane Rollick from Kane. This is a kid that just piled up a ton of rushing yards as a quarterback, a ton of touchdowns. He was actually the runner-up player of the year for the Big 30, so you knew how good he was going into a game like this. And then the other kid we didn't know a whole lot about, Trey Garzell from Port Allegheny. This is a kid who, went into practice not even, intending to be, he wasn't supposed to be one of the two quarterbacks. He was going to be a defensive back. The kid that they had on board as a quarterback decides he doesn't want to play, so they put Garzell in, right before practice starts. And he ends up being, maybe the player of the game. And both guys, both Rollick and Garzell did tremendously with their offenses. Garzell, it was a matter of just kind of making plays all game long. He ran for a touchdown. He completed all 9 or 10 of Pennsylvania's passes on the day. And Rollick, kind of the same thing, kept drives going. Scored at least one rushing, I think, and so really that was probably the difference in PA being able to put up 38 points and win that game 38-20.
The other factor, of course, was the coaches, and a couple of things happened during the game that impressed me. It was a beautiful night. The crowd seemed to be down maybe 400 or 500 from usual, but not horrendous. But two things the coaches did impress me. The first, New York State's Chris Fee from Cuba Rushford. The first thing he did was gave Tommy Easton every chance to play. Now the risk was, if he can't play, Ben Burke's going the whole way and he's one injury away from a mess. And people could have criticized him for that, but he wanted to give the kid a chance after practicing all the time. The other thing he did, late in the game, it was a two-score game. Still, it was 35-20, so you could argue that two quick touchdowns and a couple of double extra points and you win the game. But he declined, Chris did, to call his timeouts. And the reason he did was because he thought he did not want to put his players at risk in this kind of pyrrhic hope that the game was going to be won by two dramatic late touchdowns. He just let the game play out. On the other side of the ball, Smethport's Jim Berlin had an interesting circumstance. He's up 35-20, final minute and a half of the game. If he scores a touchdown, and they're at the 5-yard line, they're at the New York 5-yard line, they're probably going to score. He doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to make it look as if they're sticking it to him. You can say, well, why not just take a snap and kneel down? Well, it was 4th down, clock would have stopped. New York would have gotten the ball back, could have had 2 possessions if they worked things right. So instead, he made the decision to send out his field goal kicker. He did. Field goal is good, 38-20. Now it's not. It's a 3-possession game. Nothing's going to happen as far as Pennsylvania losing the game. And Chris Fee was extremely impressed with Jim Berlin and thought it was a classy move. And I thought it was a wonderful way to kind of put a cherry on the sundae that was that game, because it was an entertaining game.
Right, and you know, I think as you said in your follow-up story, it was an entertaining game for certainly at least the first 3 quarters when it was a close game, and both offenses really gave you something to watch. They were moving the ball. They you know, they instituted some interesting wrinkles in there. New York in the first half scored on a reverse halfback pass back to the quarterback. I think that was the first touchdown of the game. And so it really was a good competitive game, fun game. And so that was, like you said, probably the best way to you know, be able to end it. But keeping, you know, with the football theme today, we also wanted to get into the Buffalo Bills. That's one of the main reasons, you know, to be sitting with Chuck right now. And so just a couple of topics to touch on. One, you know, just the offseason in general here. The Bills, you know, said in the spring, Rex Ryan said in the spring that he felt that the Bills won the offseason, which is, you know, kind of an interesting thing to say, you know, because every team can feel like they probably won the offseason. And then things start to happen where you think, okay, you know, they probably actually didn't win the offseason. You know, the way that the draft went and the issue, you know, with their first-round pick, Shaq Lawson, and his injury. Some of the other injuries to follow, you know, even going into camp. And then the idea of, you know, something like a Carlos Williams. He shows up to camp overweight, and then he's suspended 4 games for, you know, the drug policy. And then their other running back, Jonathan Williams, I think it was the very next day, is, I think, stopped for, you know, drunk driving. And, you know, that there's another, you know, sort of hit. So with all of that being said, just where does that kind of leave the Bills here now in the middle of training camp?
It actually leaves them in a certified mess. Their first preseason game comes up on Saturday night against the Colts. And, you know, we in the media have a love-hate relationship with Rex Ryan. We love him because he's such a great talker, and my old argument is if you talk to him for 5 minutes and don't have a column, you aren't listening. But the problem is what Rex does is talk a lot. And he kind of reminds me of that phrase that Marv Levy used to have, where he said, what you do speaks so loudly, nobody can hear what you say. And we kind of need a little bit of that. And I've got to say, at the start of camp, I mean, aside from the fact that the Bills won the preseason, quote unquote, things get worse by the day. They put out their depth chart yesterday, and Carlos Williams is still listed as number 2 on the running back depth chart. Now, what's interesting about that is it's in italics, which basically says, oh, by the way, he can't play the first 4 games because he's suspended. But there were certain things you wanted to find out about the team in preseason. One of them was who is going to play wide receiver at the 3rd and 4th positions behind Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods. And we don't know that. Nobody has separated themselves. That's kind of the purpose of the preseason. But problematically, Sammy Watkins is still recovering from a broken foot.
He just came back.
Correct. So his progress is very metered. Now, understandably, on Saturday night, the first team offense, and what there is left of it, is only going to probably play a series, 2 at most. And one of the reasons is that the starting left tackle, Cordy Glenn, has a high ankle sprain. Those are not quick. They are not quick healing injuries. And Richie Incognito, the left guard, and that's the strength of their offensive line,
that whole side, has
got injured ribs. So now you have the flawed side of the quarterback, the vulnerable side, without the starting left tackle, starting left guard. And I think they're going to be very circumspect about how Tyrod Taylor is used. at the quarterback position, because what would be worse than getting him jacked because you've already got a couple of people hurt?
Right.
So those are the questions there. On the other side of the ball, if possible, it's even a worse mess, because I realize we're dealing with big egos when it comes to NFL coaches. And certainly Rex has one. There's no way he was ever going to keep Jim Schwartz as his defensive coordinator. Philosophically, they're different. He being Jim Schwartz, is a four-man line guy. Rex is a three-man line guy, and will kind of throw in junk defenses. But basically, philosophically, they're different. But it's not that long ago that we were aghast at how strong the Bills' defensive line was.
Right.
Because Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius and Mario Williams, although he forgot to show up last year, and Jerry Hughes, 2 years ago, 3 of those 4 guys made the Pro Bowl, and Jerry Hughes didn't and should have. He had 10 sacks. So now the line is entirely different. The front 3, Darius is there, Kyle Williams is back from an injury. The 3rd-round draft pick, Adolphus Washington, is also playing up there. He's going to be a good player. The Bills are convinced it was a good guy to get in the 3rd round. Unfortunately, the guys that they got in the first 2 rounds are not around. Shaq Lawson is supposed to be back, at midseason. He had shoulder surgery. We'll see. Right. We'll see. And with you covering the Bonnies, you've lived this. I've lived it with the Bills. I always think twice when somebody tells me about an injury and when somebody's projected back. Athletes depend on their bodies. They know when their bodies are ready to go. A lot of athletes have different pain thresholds, so there's a lot of factors. I'm not sure we see Shaq Lawson until the Bills' lot in this season is already decided. Meanwhile, probably the biggest need for the Bills was at inside linebacker. Reggie Ragland, a 2nd-round pick from Alabama, he's out for the season with knee surgery. So it's all of a sudden become a mess. And in my view, the strongest unit is now the secondary. Clearly, Ronald Darby and Stephon Gilmore, pretty strong tandem.
Right.
Aaron Williams, who was a bust when the Bills took him in the 2nd round in 2011 as a cornerback, he's thrived at safety. I don't know if he's a great safety yet, but he's a pretty good one. But Corey Graham, I think he's kind of an average guy. But as a group, that's not a bad group. But linebacking, the Bills have major questions. On the line, they have major questions. So no matter how optimistic people might be, and we know a lot of them about the Bills season, right, there's reason for skepticism.
Right. And so having said all that, especially with the defense, I think one of the things that fans want to know is that, so 2 years ago with Schwartz, their defense is one of the best in football. Last year, they bring in a defensive guy in Rex Ryan. They have largely the same personnel, and so you think their defense is going to be right back up there again. And if it's possible, maybe even better, because that's where Rex is, really made a name for himself in his career here. And then, inexplicably, or maybe not, because there's probably a lot of reasons there, the defense actually gets much worse with that same personnel. This year, it's obviously going to be different. There's different guys. There's going to be injuries to get through. But I guess, how do you see that defense? Is there a chance that, if healthy and when, and maybe if you get Shaq Lawson back and some of these linebackers, step up and they get a good rookie year out of Washington, can the defense be better than it was last year? Can it actually get to the point where it was one of the best defenses in the league with Rex? Because that's what he's supposed to be bringing to the table here, I think.
I don't think so. And one of the reasons is 2 of the guys that they really put all the house money on aren't there. And Shaq might be back by the end of the year, but it's going to be, in my mind, too late. And the Bills have a much tougher schedule this year. And I'll tell you, the other thing about the way things have unfolded for the Bills were 4th in the league, yardage surrendered, under Jim Schwartz. Last year, they fell to 19th. That's a pretty precipitous fall when a guy who comes in says, not unlike Greg Williams predicting the Bills were going to set the NFL record for sacks when his first year, when he took over back in 2000. But I don't see any indication that this team is going to. I think maybe they'll be better than 19th, which they were last year, but I'm not sure. But they were in the lower half of the league. Circumstantially, I think the Bills have really gotten themselves in a very, very awkward position. And, you know, there's a lot of if comes. There always are injury-wise. But the Bills already have gotten into it. And really, we haven't gotten to the most fatiguing part of training camp where you tend to get guys hurt. So it's hard to be optimistic. I want to, for the reader's sake, to give them reasons to be hopeful, but I am skeptical.
Right, and as you said, you know, in most years, I think the Bills at a certain point in the season are, you know, maybe a little bit hit, you know, with injuries.
Right.
And especially with the Bills, it seems like some of their best players, their star players, so to speak,
right.
become. But the fact that it's already happening right now and they haven't even played the first snap of the preseason yet, I think is certainly a big time concern, to the point where, you know, people are talking about, you know, maybe don't play any of the starters, maybe just don't play them at all in the preseason here because you can't risk any more. And so we'll get into more of that, you know, next time, and certainly on the other side of the ball, there's stuff to talk about there, specifically with Tyrod Taylor and what he might be in year 2 as the starting quarterback. We can get into some of that stuff next week, the kind of year that Sammy Watkins, you know, might have this year. Right. So until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.